y'all. We're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Kristen.
I'm Dr. Erin.
And you are exceptionally welcome to our coverage of Netflix's The Pharmacist. We are in episode 2 of a show that told us it was talking about the opioid crisis, and good news, this episode, it finally does.
Yeah. Episode 1 left me a little confused.
So we spend the first 15 or so minutes of the episode kind of wrapping up the death and trial of Dan Schneider Jr. and kind of, putting a bow on that in a way, as it were. And then Dan is still, shocking no one who understands anything about trauma, putting Danny's killer in jail did not end this need in him to fix things, to this need for penance, which is essentially what he's doing.
Yeah.
So he, as a pharmacist, realizes that pretty much the only prescription he's filling once we hit about 2001 is even earlier than that, I think, like 1996 maybe even, or maybe it's 2001, I'm not sure, is OxyContin.
Yeah, it's the year 2000 that we're in now.
Great. So all he's doing,
like peak Oxy early years.
Peak Oxy years. We're 2 years away from Richard Sackler recusing himself of any position at the company so that he can avoid prosecution that they know will eventually come. And for more about that, please watch Dopesick, or read Dopesick, or read Empire of Pain. Moving on, I'm referring to my notes here.
Yeah.
So, he's also noticing that the prescriptions are for something called the Holy Trinity, which is Oxy, Soma, and Xanax. And those three kind of taken together, in particular, now, is very popular in this part of the world. There are pockets of the opioid crisis where that Holy Trinity did not necessarily infect it. And it was really a focus on Oxy. In a good chunk of the South, that whole, and when I say the South, I mean the Bible Belt, and I'm doing this because, the Gulf Coast. Mm-hmm. A huge chunk there, that Holy Trinity was... everybody did all three. You didn't really ever do one. You always did all three. There's not as much research or conversation around this triad of drugs as I would like. So I'm glad they brought that up and brought that into this conversation. I'm glad it was highlighted.
Same, because just to jump in here real quick, one of the things we didn't get that in Dopesick because the focus was on Appalachia, where this wasn't as common. So I was really glad to get this, and we sort of talked about it in the first episode, but one of the things that I think is so interesting about what the show did is shows you, how the opioid crisis manifests differently everywhere.
Yeah.
Depending on, cultural factors, doctors, who was targeted by what pharma company, all these kinds of things. And so there's a lot of similarities between this story as he gets into understanding the opioid crisis in Louisiana that are similar to the story in Dopesick, but there's a lot of differences as well, and this was one of the first ones.
Yeah, and my understanding is that once we hit, the 2000s, the Trinity really took place in Appalachia, but at that point, Dopesick's story had kind of stopped and moved on. So it's important to remember, too, that, this show starts, essentially, his opioid crusade starts in 2000 and keeps going and is arguably still happening right now.
Yeah.
Whereas the Dopesick show ends in 2006. So there's only a very short crossover in that time. So he noticed as well that this one doctor was writing a lot of these prescriptions. And this doctor, she was starting people at 40 milligrams of Oxy. Mm-hmm. Starting people at 40 is a choice and probably means you're a pill mill. And so that's pretty much what he determines this lady is, whose name I did not write down, and I'm sure you did.
Dr. Cleggett.
Thank you. And this episode is a lot about Dan trying to get law enforcement to move at his speed and not their speed to shut down Dr. Cleggett. That's the summary of this episode.
So good. You're so much better at succinct summaries. I love it.
The largest note that I wrote, twofold is, oh, no, I have two large notes. Oh, Dan,
Okay.
you sweet summer child.
Uh-huh.
And legitimately, the length of time the investigations take while people die is infuriating.
Sure. It 100% is. Yeah, and I think a couple of things that I want to pull out from this episode that I thought were really helpful was as he is reflecting, he keeps recording himself even after Jeffrey is sentenced. He was sentenced to 15.
Everyone.
Yeah. He was sentenced to 15 years when he was 16 years of age. And he served 13 years of that sentence. And when we meet him, he is obviously no longer incarcerated. Shane left New Orleans because of the trauma of what happened to her in the trial, and she never returned. Which is, interesting. The one thing that his family said that when they realized that the trial and the conviction of Jeffrey did not bring them closure over Danny's death is that normal's never normal anymore. And I thought that was such a great line for understanding the way that trauma rewrites our lives, as we have all gone through this communal trauma of COVID. But I wanted to bring in where he talks about, he's reflecting on addiction, and he decides to go back to work at the pharmacy, and he realizes that as pharmacists, they aren't trained about addiction at all.
That's a great point that I missed.
School,
Thank you.
which I thought was so important. Because they're prescribing people with things that they can become addicted to. Now, we know at the time from our friends at Dopesick and our coverage of Dopesick that Purdue Pharma was really pushing the idea that OxyContin was virtually non-addictive, but that was a lie. And so I think the key for him is that, as you said, everyone coming in is getting Oxy prescriptions, but a lot of them are kids Danny's age. And he's like, I think that was a huge trigger for him where he was like, this is these kids are Danny in a way. He starts to record patients as they come in to get their prescriptions filled. Y'all, it's not legal. Just saying it's not legal. And
even if it's legal in the state of Louisiana, because I am not up on Louisiana law, it's possible that they have a one-party consent state. I think it's shady, and I don't care
shady.
for it.
It's super shady, and I know he meant well, but
oh yeah,
it's super shady.
So it's possible it's legal. I don't know Louisiana law, but oof, do I not like it? And I would be pissed if my pharmacist was recording me as I picked up my prescriptions.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah,
I would probably sue.
I would definitely change pharmacies.
I would definitely change pharmacies.
I would leave a negative Yelp review.
I would at least do that. Yeah, I think the other thing that we learned that's important to emphasize as well, we learned this through Dopesick, the reason that Appalachia and other heavily industrialized areas were targeted by Purdue Pharma was because those people usually get injured on the job. And this was very true for St. Bernard Parish. There were 2 oil refineries nearby, and a lot of kids were abusing their parents' prescriptions. So I just wanted to highlight.
As there were people that genuinely needed opioids. We always want to bring this in.
Yeah.
Genuinely needed opioids, and because of Purdue's marketing tactics, are not able to have a healthy and productive relationship with opioids that could exist.
Yes, that was a critique. A lot of our coverage. Even though we didn't write or direct Dopesick, and a critique of Dopesick was that and arguably, as we said on our channel, Dopesick was telling a very specific story. But yeah, there are always people who legitimately need opioids in order to live and function and use them safely.
Yep.
So I wanted to make sure to make that point. And then, this is where he admits to us honestly that he is trying to save these kids because he didn't save Danny. So
I'm glad we got that.
I'm glad we got that level of self-awareness. One of the young women who he was counseling about the use of OxyContin dies from an overdose, and he reads her obituary in the paper. And that's when he starts to go full on, like, Wild Wild West sheriff. I am gonna solve this problem because it is clear to me that no, police or any sort of prosecutors are going to do it. And one of the things we learned so helpfully from Dopesick was how long these cases take to build, how hard it is to get these cases, whether you're in the DEA and you're in diversion, whether you're a U.S. Attorney's Office, Attorney General, local police. It is real hard. Because as we learned in Dopesick, you're not trying to find a drug cartel. These are not illegal drugs that are coming into your community. They are being legally prescribed by medical professionals, and it is a drug that has been approved and, like, signed off on by the FDA. So it's real hard, and there was zero understanding from Dan that it's real hard to do this. He was like, I want this lady arrested, convicted now. He goes to the FBI.
And, like, God bless the FBI agents who talk to the cameras because they're so diplomatic.
Oh, they're
like,
so... And the DEA agents.
And
those two women from the DEA were baller. And they were just like, I would have
Mr.
loved...
Schneider did not appreciate.
Yeah, I would have loved to prosecute Dr. Cleggett faster than I did. But that's not how federal investigations work. Again,
people are going to die. Yes, and that's shitty.
And it's awful. It's awful. It's a broken system, but we still have to work within it. I just read one of my notes. You think they're going to tell you about their investigation? He's like, they're not telling me what they're doing in their investigation, so they're lying.
I can't imagine why.
Buddy, I love
we
you.
cannot get Netflix to disclose its subscriber numbers. Do you think the FBI is going to tell you what they're doing in an investigation? Like,
do you think they're going to tell
summer child,
a civilian? You are the aforementioned pharmacist. You are not a law enforcement officer professional.
The only thing you can do at this point, chicken, is to stop filling the prescriptions.
Yeah.
Which is your choice as a person with agency.
Yeah.
You can't do anything else. I will say, before we forget though, we did get to see the video, I Got My Life Back, which was lovely to see again after so much coverage of it in Dopesick. I was like, hi friend.
I know.
High propaganda element. Good to see you.
I know. As soon as they shot the clips, I was like, oh, Rick and Randy.
Oh, Rick and Randy, how are you guys?
The boy band of justice. We love them so much. Yeah, and this is where we get towards the end of the episode. The other thing I just want to bring up real quickly is we talked about this in episode 1, but we really get to see it in episode 2, the damage that this does to his family, to Dan Schneider's family. He believes, as the title of the episode indicates, that he is now on a mission from God.
Very difficult to logic with holy missions.
To save as many people from Oxy as possible. Again, lovely sentiment. Again,
entirely possibly true.
You can't fix a broken system as one person, and you can't force a system to move at the pace that you think is necessary. And
sorry, go ahead.
I just, like, as you said, like, it's awful. It's effing horrific that so many people died because of this broken system. So many people. But vigilantism wasn't working either.
I had to walk around my office a little bit at the end of this, like towards the end of this episode, because I was just like, you're wasting their time.
Yeah.
Like you are hampering the
time and
investigation.
resources, 100%.
And I was so angry, but I was reminded of, and I cannot remember what season this is, of The West Wing, but they're talking about what peace in the Middle East looks like. And Leo McGarry says, could someone just tell me what it is? Oh, it's in Isaac and Ishmael. It's in the beginning of the second season. Tell me what it looks like. Is it carpet bombing Gaza? Is it assassinating these 10 people? Someone just tell me what it looks like and we'll do it.
Yeah.
The problem is we don't actually know what it looks like. The process of achieving peace is what shows us what peace can look like. And I was reminded of that in this instance. The process of eliminating pill mills shows us how to eliminate pill mills. The process of prosecuting Purdue teaches us how to prosecute Purdue.
Yeah.
Because short of carpet bombing and assassinating literally every person you disagree with, this is what we have.
It's a process.
It's a process, and the process is what will bring the justice. And I think at one point he was just like, so many people are dying, and I was just like, yes. And a whole hell of a lot of people died from the flu before we got a vaccine. It's shitty. It's terrible. It's the planet. It's what we got for you. Like, a lot of people died before we had soap. You know what that taught us? We needed soap. It's not callousness. It's understanding the limitations of human ingenuity.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because we've spent all this time in these first 2 episodes talking about how the criminal justice system doesn't work.
Right.
But it's like it's the only viable option, because the other option is straight up vigilantism.
And it doesn't even, if that doesn't even work in Gotham, it's not going to work here.
Like lawlessness. Like that is a spectrum. That is a binary, really. Yeah. There is like law, like you go through the legal system or you don't.
And the legal system needs fixing, but we learn how to fix it by doing it.
Yeah. I just it just blew me away, y'all, that he was so, and you know,
it smacked of privilege, of white guy privilege, that he thought he knew better than everybody else.
And that he could fix it, and these people weren't doing enough, and they were lying, and they didn't care about people who were dying. And I was like, you don't know these women that work in diversion. They work in diversion. I'm pretty sure they care about drug problems in this country.
Sweeping generalizations about a world like it's the Julia Roberts thing. You've been dealing with this garbage for 10 minutes. I've been dealing with it for 10 years.
For 10 years. Yeah. Yeah. And I understand it's coming from his trauma. I 100% do. It just manifested in a deeply unproductive way.
That made me grumpy as a viewer.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And we get the view that it, and again, at this episode, like the first episode for me, is lacking for any sort of outside voice analyzing what's happening.
There's no context.
There's no context, because I would have loved to have a mental health professional talk about the trauma of losing a child and how it can destroy families or it can damage families, to explain what he was doing, to explain why he was so obsessed with recording everything. He recorded family meals with his wife and daughter. Like, y'all, that is some deep trauma response. I would have loved some context for that. Yeah. And then, I forgot the end of the episode is when he freaks out because he thinks he's being followed. That was nuts. That was a nuts way to end this episode, and I was like, what show are we watching?
Like, I had to take a break because I was tired. Like, the show made me tired.
Yeah, I went a full week before I watched episodes 3 and 4. I was like, brr.
And I think if I was coming into this entire conversation completely fresh, I hadn't been thinking about it for 10 years, I haven't been researching it forever, I'm sure I would see less holes in this.
Sure.
And I might get caught up in his anger a little bit more. So we are, I think, ostensibly, possibly not the target market for this documentary. But I do know all that. And I'm not caught up in his anger. I'm concerned for his anger. I'm not caught up in it.
Yeah, I think maybe it's like, because I don't have the same level of experience, personally or professionally, that you do with this part of our history, and the opioid crisis. But it's gonna sound really trite. But I watched Dopesick. But I read a book about it. And I think we talked about this offline when we were talking about this show and what we wanted to say about it. It's that I watched this after I watched Dopesick. So some of it was new information. I said in this episode, some of it was a different perspective. It's certainly interesting to get the perspective of a pharmacist. We only get that a little bit in Dopesick. But it wasn't new information, and I spent all my anger on those 8 episodes. I spent all my anger. And, Dr. Kristen and I don't sit in our anger for very long.
It's just not how we process the world.
We then relatively quickly, depending on the circumstance, move on to pragmatism. And so I'm definitely now, in my relationship with the opioid crisis, still angry on a general level. Angry at the level of Dan Schneider, no. I spent all that anger. And now I'm like, okay, but you're hurting this. You're not helping.
Yeah.
We have to do things pragmatically. We have to work within the system even if it's broken. And advocate for systemic change at the same time. But I think that's where I'm at, where I'm like, if I had watched this before I watched Dopesick, I probably would have been a lot angrier.
It's possible. I think our relationship with consent and as academics and researchers was always still going to put us off him.
Yes. Yeah. As a researcher, as a person who had to literally train for months in how to appropriately and respectfully get consent from the people who were gracious enough to give me their time, and had to be deeply aware of the impacts of it, what I was asking of them, and how it impacted our relationship. To just record people all the time, willy-nilly. The same thing when I watched American Crime Story on the impeachment, and I was just so mad at Linda Tripp all the time. I was like, she doesn't know you're recording her, Linda. You didn't get her consent. And yeah, it's the same thing. It really, I hate to use this word. It is a hill we will both die on. I was going to say it's a trigger, but I don't like that word for both of us. That for me, a lot of it was I couldn't get past the fact that he thought that was okay.
And justified because of his priorities.
Because of his pain and his priorities.
Yeah, it's the centering of his experience in this process that is really difficult for me. Because part of being a trained law enforcement or a trained researcher or anything else is to understand that you are not at the center of whatever you are doing. Yeah. And so by centering himself and his trauma, he's perpetuating trauma.
And on a whole host of other folks.
On a whole host of other levels, not just to himself, but to a lot of other people. So glad we have 2 more episodes.
We will decide, I guess, at the end whether we think the ends justify the means. Right now we're not in that place.
No, not so much. It'll be interesting. In the meantime, we'll be back next week with episode 3, and we look forward to it. In the meantime, we hope that this coverage finds you as well as it possibly can in these times. We also hope that if you've enjoyed this video, you can hit like on the old below on the video, because the algorithm really likes that. Please subscribe to our content so that you don't miss episode 3 or anything else we do. And if you'd like to encounter our conversations not in video form, we've got a weekly newsletter that is just the place to do that. And we'd love to have you subscribe to that for lots of things, announcements, behind the scene features, and letting you know about national religious holidays you may not be aware of. We serve a myriad of purposes in that newsletter, but you got to be on it to get all the treats. So in the meantime, whether we see you in the newsletter or in the next video, once again, we hope you are as well as possible, and we thank you for spending your time with us.
Take care, everybody.